Before we started talking about the episode, we kind of told each other that the idea that being in first place June 1st is going to be both important and not so important.
Right. You know, it clearly has some indication to your success. And I think in the past, it meant a lot more because there was only one team getting to the playoffs and going to the World Series, and that was the team that won the entire league. So being in first place on June 1st mattered a lot more because there was only one spot.
When I was growing up, it seemed to me like July 4th was like a watershed date, and that was probably closer to the halfway point of the season at the time as to, sort of indicating where you're going. But now we try to get an earlier and earlier viewpoint so that teams can decide, are we buyers or sellers or neither?
Because you really have to decide before the trading deadline and before the All-Star break, really, if you're traders or sellers. Because, even though sometimes you see teams come back after the All-Star break and play like a new team for, a couple weeks, never really understand that.
The wild card, so yeah, you're right. So in 69 divisional play started, but you had to win your division to get into the National League or American League Championship Series. And it was all the way till 1996 when you started the wild card that all of a sudden you didn't have to win your division. And that's kind of where things began to unravel a little.
And now with 3 wild card teams.
Right. So last year was the first year where you had 6 teams in each league into the playoffs. So you had 3 division winners and 3 wild card teams. And obviously, they only played a 1 game to determine, who's going to play. What 2 teams play to get down to 1, and then you go into the real playoffs and when you're playing series instead of just
a 1 game.
A 1 game. And I think we look at the teams that did it last year, and you can take some heart that if your team is not in first place, even has a losing record at this point, now you have a chance.
Oh, yeah,
I won't say a good one, but you have a chance.
Last year on June 1st, the Atlanta Braves were 24-27. They won 101 games.
Yeah. But
Phillies.
But every of the past 4 years, keep going.
Phillies. This is all from last year. Phillies were 22-29 last year. Went to the World Series. Seattle was 21-29. Made the playoffs. Cleveland was 22-34. Won the division. Made
22-24.
22-24.
But that was June 1st.
That was June 1st. Won the division. Made the playoffs.
Yeah, and the Mets were in first place on June 1st. They made the playoffs, and
that was it.
But they lost a division. So and what's interesting about last year is of the past 4 years, and we'll talk about the others. 9 out of the 12 teams that were in position June 1 to make the playoffs made it. Well, that was the first year where 12 teams made the playoffs. So it's kind of about 75%. I'm not about 75.
Exactly.
75% of the team made the playoffs. The year before, the Braves were 25-27. And they ended up winning the World Series, right? So they came all the way back, and the Mets were in first place June 1st in that year as well.
And 8 of the 10 teams that were in first place.
So 80% made the playoffs that year. Well, forget the pandemic year for a second, right?
Yeah, we're going to drop that from this because baseball.
You can't have a June 1st thing when they weren't even playing.
Exactly.
2019, the Washington Nationals were 25-33, and they ended up winning the World Series. On the other those 2 years, by the way, in 2021 and 2019, the Cubs were 31-23 and 31-20 both those years in first place. They did not make the playoffs. So we can go the other way.
I'm just going to tell you what this means looking at these, because then even in 2018, you had the Dodgers who were 27-30, ended up winning the division. So what that tells me is if you want to win the NL East, don't be leading the division on June 1st.
It appears. And you have a chance to win the World Series.
You have a chance to win the World Series because apparently that's like the secret sauce. You got to not be leading the division, and then you make a run.
So if you look at this year's standings and you think, okay, so who is in position? Well, everybody knows Tampa's the best team in baseball and was June 1st and still remains that team.
They only have a 5-game lead over the Orioles. So I think what's going to be interesting is
Orioles.
Yeah, I know the Orioles. The
for real Orioles, right? They're like the Diamondbacks. This team's for real now.
I think people believe in the Orioles a little bit more than they believe in the Diamondbacks because the Orioles had the success last year in the second half. So I think people are a little bit more ready to believe that team is kind of here than I think the D-backs.
I think you're right in that. I think they have more pitching. I think everybody looks at the Diamondbacks and you think about Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. And I'm not as big a Merrill Kelly fan as some people are.
Zach Gallen.
Zach Gallen's a great pitcher. That's it, though. Their
I'll
pitching
put it
kind of
this way.
shaky.
I wouldn't want to play them in a 1-game playoff, though, and have to face Gallen.
No. And we saw what happened, last year in games like that.
But I think what you're going to probably look at is less than the number of conversions for teams that win the division after leading on June 1st, and more the conversion of number of teams that make the playoffs after leading the division on June 1st. Because I could see a team like maybe Tampa stumbles a little bit in the second half. Orioles keep playing.
They're still going to make the playoffs.
They're still going to make the playoffs. They just might not win the division.
Right. And that's why, that division and the Red Sox, who've had a decent start to the season, they were 28-27 on June 1st. I don't believe it.
Well, I think
too tough a division.
If you're the Red Sox, you're thinking, why couldn't we just play in literally like any other
division? We might be leading the Central Division if we were playing in that division.
And we would be in the hunt in the West.
So I just don't. With Chris Sale getting hurt, I don't know. The same thing about Baltimore, by the way. John Means, who I like a lot as a pitcher, is still trying to recuperate. I had another setback, so we don't know when he's going to come back. And they have more pitching than do the Diamondbacks, but they need a guy like that to give them a chance to do something in the playoffs, I think.
And then you have the flip side. So you have the AL East, where it looks pretty well sewn up in that the Rays are probably going to win it, but then you have the Yankees and the Orioles that are going to be competing with them.
And the Blue Jays.
And the Blue Jays, they'll be there.
There could be 4 teams. All the wild card teams could come
out of
from the AL East.
Right.
It's possible.
I think the only other threat is one coming out of the West, because you look at a team like the Central, and I'd say being in first place on June 1st means nothing for leading the AL Central.
It would appear that the Central of the AL is going to deliver a division winner and nothing else.
Is the division winner in the AL Central above 500 at the end of the season?
That's a good question. They're barely there now. I think so, because the other teams in the division you'll play enough will give you those extra wins.
Right. It's just wild to think about. That could actually happen this year.
And if you believe in Texas, and they're in first place, so with the Astros closing fast, obviously.
I'm terrified. If I'm Texas, I'm terrified of the Astros, especially with DeGrom being DeGrom right now. And unfortunately, we're not talking about DeGrom being DeGrom on the mound. We're talking about DeGrom being DeGrom on the IL.
He hasn't pitched since like late April. It's June.
Again, this is just classic DeGrom.
So the Rangers, who've had a very nice year so far under Bruce Bochy and gotten really good performances out of Nate Eovaldi and Jonah Heim behind the plate, has turned out to be one of the better catchers in the league. If I had to say, they'll be the team that will be trying to beat one of those AL East teams out for that last wild card.
I'm going to say this. I think what's going to also be interesting is, do the Angels go out and get Shane Bieber at the deadline? They're in the hunt for the AL West right now.
The AL West or the wild card league?
Both.
Yeah.
Because they're not that. They're only a couple games out, but more the wild card. But I think a team like them goes, we got to do something to show Ohtani because they're actually in it this year.
Right. I think that they will not be sellers. If what you're saying, I don't think Ohtani's going to be traded this year.
I think the Angels are going to go out and buy high on a guy. Like, I could see, especially if the
Guardians, they try?
Yeah. If the Guardians are sleepwalking still, come the deadline, and they're willing to sell you Shane Bieber, I would go for it.
In the National League, the Braves are in first place, which I guess, as you said, in the East is not such a good thing necessarily. You have reason to be nervous.
Right, you have reason to be nervous, but at the same time, you're the Atlanta Braves. I don't think you have that much reason to be nervous. You're a very good baseball team.
The Mets and the Phillies have both not really woken up yet. The Mets not quite as bad as the Phillies. I still have a hard time thinking the Phillies are going to also sleepwalk through the entire season.
But I think with the case of the Mets, I could see it not coming through because the pitching is just old and never gets on track this year. They're just old and they're injured. Quintana never comes back and gives you much. Carrasco continues.
There could be a breakdown.
And there just could be a breakdown. And
I don't think that's going to happen, but it could.
It could. Scherzer and Verlander are good, but they're clearly older and they're not their elite selves. Like, I could just see that happening this year for the Mets.
Fortunately for them,
I could also see them winning like 80 games in the second half, basically.
Yeah. I think that they're getting healthier at the right time, and after last year, as we keep saying on this podcast, just want to get to October with Scherzer and Verlander and hopefully Senga healthy, and let's take our chances.
I mean, I'm excited to go see Senga pitch today.
Yeah.
We're recording this on Sunday. We're actually heading over to Citi Field after this to watch the Mets. We get to watch Senga pitch today, which was exciting because we didn't think he was going to be pitching.
And what a break as a Met fan, right? Because what was supposed to happen is, Senga only pitches once a week, sort of, because that's the way he pitched in Japan. So, he was like a Friday pitcher in Japan.
He was a 6-day rest. And they talked with him about doing it on 5 days. That was a whole big thing.
Well, we thought we were getting David Peterson today.
Right. So just to go on a Met tangent here for a second. So there's this wild statistic that, like, the Mets actually, their starting pitching has been pretty good, with the exception of David Peterson. He's 1-7.
Yeah.
Like, he's killed them this year.
Yeah, of course, he went down to the International League and was the pitcher of the week or the month and all that kind of stuff.
Which just tells you
that and 275 get your subway ride, folks.
The difference between AAA and Major League Baseball. David Peterson was busting out in the major leagues. 1-7 looked awful every time he was up there. Goes down to AAA,
dominant
pitcher of the week.
Yeah. So I think the Marlins, have had a good start that everybody talks about. I don't think they're going to last.
The Marlins are the kind of team that if they were playing in a Central or a West division, everybody would be talking about them as a plucky upstart that was having a better season than people expected. But they play in the NL East where you've got teams you expect to be better than them.
And so you would think, are the Marlins going to be sellers at all? Well, I kind of feel like, hey, we're having a decent season.
I don't think.
Why should we sell assets to get more? What?
Right. Why would you sell? The only reason you would sell asset is you had an expiring, aging asset that was going to leave anyway, and I can't think of who that would be in the Marlins.
Well, with the Marlins, there's only one thing: it's money. Right. So if they got a guy they got to pay, and they can get something that they can defer that payment, they seem to do that.
Well, that's what they've done in the past.
Right. They're a little different now.
They're a little different now. They've got new GM, but it's just like I just can't think of a guy on that roster that you would want to sell on. Because you would be the only people are going to want are young guys that you have control on.
I'm thinking pitchers. Do you think a guy like Luzardo might go someplace?
If a team walks up to them and gives them a dumb deal.
If the Angels come in and say,
the Angels backed up a truck to we'll give you the farm for Sandy Alcantara.
Well, I don't see that. I think a guy like Luzardo is more likely to be because he's shown
he's this year's
good stuff
Pablo
this
Lopez.
year. Right. And so they seem to do that. So I think there are a lot of teams though that can take heart that they're still in it, and they're not
the entirety of the NL Central.
Yeah, right. They're not. These are not sellers. So the Cubs are wondering, are we sellers or buyers? Are we in it? Well, they're still in it.
They're probably going to wait to see how it shakes out.
They can't decide.
They might not be sellers today, but on July 4th, they very well could be sellers because maybe the Brewers catch fire for a couple weeks and rattle off, go 13-2, and now all of a sudden the division looks out of reach.
Where are you on the Pirates?
Like the Marlins. It's a plucky upstart team. They're performing.
Nice start.
They got to do it for when you've been bad, like the same way last year. The Orioles and the Mariners kind of had to prove it to everybody that they were going to be able to sustain it. And the Indians, the Guardians, needed to do that for us this year, and they're not. Last year is looking more and more like kind of a weird.
The Guardians, the thing that surprises me is that everybody knew they needed more offense. They have very little power besides Jose Ramirez, and they didn't do anything.
They doubled down.
They didn't do anything
on the small ball style.
Okay, we've got a nice team. We play a nice brand of baseball, but we were leaving our guys. And the Met fans can tell you the same thing, that the lack of power, really begins to weigh on your club after a while.
Right. You don't. I think one of the things that maybe we as baseball fans didn't appreciate with the high average guys is having a bunch of guys with good on base and good batting averages doesn't mean a lot if they don't score.
Yes, you need to score runs to win games.
Right, Daniel Vogelbach's, 400 on base doesn't mean anything if the Mets are losing every game 2-1. Yeah, sure, he's getting on base, but nobody's knocking him in. So those guys that hit 250 but hit 40 home runs do help keep your offense moving.
And that's why I think sometimes on-base average, just to detour for a second, is overrated at a time because you needed more than just getting a walk when you have the go-ahead run at second base and you've got your DH up and you're thinking, oh, he walked and got to first base. Great job.
Oh, man, I wonder. I bet if there was a way to break it down situationally, you could find a lot of empty on-base percentage stats where guys were getting on base in situations that weren't actually doing anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not the guy's fault. If Pete Alonso comes up in the 8th inning with a guy on second base, 2 outs, the pitcher just walks him. There's nothing Pete can do about that.
Right. And so they're not trying to walk Vogelbach, but he's got a good eye.
He's got a good eye.
But he also looks at more third strikes than any player I can think of.
Right. And the frustration is that it feels like he's looking to walk.
Right. And that's not what you want from your DH. I'd say if he was a speed guy at the top of the lineup,
it'd be different.
The old walk as good as a hit kind of a thing.
Yeah, like and today's sponsored Met Rant is brought to you by Almost Cooperstown.
Yeah. So I went back also and pulled the first 50 games since the wild card year, and this is came out on MLB. Andrew Simon was the writer of this article, and I really was kind of interesting because if you think about 50 games before this year, and we started really early this year in the season, so we got to
people. I don't think people necessarily realize how much earlier the season got started,
and how there were a lot of games.
Because I didn't even realize it until you brought this up to me.
We're already past the third. We got past the third. The season mark by June 1. That doesn't happen very often. So the first 50 games used to be around June 1 at this point.
Now we're already past that.
So since the wild card era in 2000, so just in idea of who had the worst record and made it to the playoffs. Division winners, I should say. 22-28, 2013 Dodgers. They finished 92-70. Okay, so they came back. The A's in 2012 started 22-8. They won the division. The Cubs won a division at 22-28 in 2007.
Wow.
The Cardinals, the first year of wild card play. This is kind of interesting. The first year of wild card play, the Cardinals started 22-28. They finished 88-74.
So it seems like there's a lot of teams that just go on these second half runs where they just play at an elite level for the second half of the season, which would allow you to go from not in first to first pretty easily.
And it kind of means something differently. There's a lot of other teams in here. The Braves did it in 22, as we said. The Dodgers, we talked about the 18 Dodgers. The Blue Jays did it in 15. The Twins won a division in 2006, 23-27. And the A's did it in 2006. They won 93 games starting 23-27. So if you look at your team and your team is a few games under 500, take heart, fans, because it's not necessarily over yet.
Realistically, there's only two teams we can kind of say for sure are out of it. The Oakland Athletics and probably the Royals. Even the Royals, because the
Royals are done.
The Athletics are for sure done. We can say that with confidence.
That's
and if they prove me wrong, I'm not even going to be upset because that will be one of the greatest sports stories of all time.
And one thing about baseball is finishing last is not like basketball or football in terms of you getting a good player that's going to change your franchise.
Right. It just doesn't work that way.
The next year even or something like that.
It's not like you finish, the Spurs finished, bad in the NBA this year, and your reward is Victor Wembanyama, who is, the next unicorn to play in the NBA. You don't get that in baseball. You can't have one guy just come and change the entire fortune of a team. Certainly not as a rookie. Out of nowhere. That's very unusual as a draft pick.
So if your team's like I would go on top of you and say then, and we talked about this in our picks before the season. The same teams are at the bottom, right? The Nationals, we didn't think would do anything. The Rockies, we didn't think would do anything, and we had talked about where they are in their level of development. Well, the Nationals don't have their ownership thing is all messed up,
but
so
you know what?
I
think if the Nationals are happy is that they're not laughing stock bad.
No.
That was the fear. You had.
I think that's true.
I think the same way. If you're a Tiger fan, you're much happier this year. You're not good, but you're in second place in the division. The young kids are starting to play a little bit
Absolutely.
better.
You are trying to be this year's Orioles. Mm-hmm. But you're not a playoff team.
No.
You're not making. In fact, the guy who's he's hurt is the pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez, who of course pitched his best game of the year against the Mets. He is hurt, but he's a guy likely to be traded because he's on a big contract. The Tigers could probably get some good assets from somebody like the Angels,
right? Who need a pitcher,
like
somebody that
some young pitchers in there, and we'll go for next year or the year after.
You were never going to win the division. You were never unless all of a sudden for whatever reason that team comes out through now till the All-Star break and past it playing like 750% baseball. Then things change, but you're not expecting that to happen.
Yeah, we're not talking about a miracle Braves of 1914, right? Who started 4-22, and they went 68-13 to finish the season and won the league by 10.5 games.
That was the Braves.
That was a crazy season.
That was us last year with the Braves. There's no way the Braves can play 700 baseball the rest of the way. Spoiler alert, they did.
Yeah. And so since 1996, when the wild card started, 76 out of 132 division winners, that's 58% for those scoring at home, held at least a share of the division lead entering June 1st. 58% held at least a share. Okay. I thought it was going to be higher than that. You have to add in the wild card teams to really say, where are you? Because you don't have to win anymore. You just got to make the darn playoffs.
That probably changes how some teams play down the stretch. If you started falling back, you were in the lead, and then you fell back a little bit, and now you're 5 games back with 10 to play. You might not manage those 5 games the same way you would if there was only a divisional spot.
I think that's true. And 14 out of 26 World Series winners were division leaders on June 1st. Well, that's a little more than 50%. Take heart, fans. You have a chance.
You have a chance.
So if you're the Yankees and you're thinking, oh, man, the Rays got off to a great start, but we got a good club, and we're going to get some of our pitchers back and all that kind of stuff. Yankees don't have to win the AL East to get to the World Series and even win it.
You always just have to think about the Seattle Mariners won more games in the regular season than any team has ever won.
2001?
2001. Right. They lost in the first round of the playoffs.
116 games. They won 116 games,
and they couldn't win 3 when it mattered. But so that's what you got to think. If you're in first place, you got to take heart. That means you've got a good. You're going to probably be in the playoffs, and you're going to have a shot at the World Series. If you're not in first place, you're not dead yet.
And what we can't tell right now and think about is injuries will probably also play a big role in a team that is in position that all of a sudden they get hurt in a way that we don't even talk about that very much.
Right, because you can't predict it. If all of a sudden Scherzer and Verlander come up hurt for the Mets, you just kiss the playoff goodbye, start selling at the deadline. You got no chance this year.
Yeah, I think it's hard to overcome, and that impresses me about the Rays, right? Because they're doing all this without Glass now, right? So, might have been their best pitcher at one point. Well, McClanahan, I guess, is now. But so the injuries will probably play a bigger part in determining what teams will do, right? If you're thinking about your team, that we have a chance, where the Cardinals can't have given up yet, right?
No.
But they've got their issues going. Okay, if Arenado gets hurt and Goldschmidt gets hurt, I think we might be looking at the season differently in a few weeks.
Exactly. And then just to finish off, I was thinking back on our season preview episode, and we're like, this has to be the year the Rays devil magic doesn't work.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, we got to stop doing that.
I'm the worst at that. I can't believe. And what's most amazing to me about the Rays is the offense, that they became this power hitting team because what? Besides Randy Arozarena, I couldn't name one guy who can hit home runs on the team. No, because everybody can.
Yeah.